is up, guys? I'm Shannon. This is Christy. Welcome back, Christy.
Thanks,
We're so
Shannon.
thankful. We're so thankful
Love
for
it.
Queen Christy. But again, we are continuing in our series called The Talk. We are in week 3, I believe. We have one more week after this, and I personally just really enjoyed having these conversations. This is my first time being on camera having these conversations, so we'll see how that goes. But again, I've really appreciated this series. Jeff kind of in the first week talked a lot about identity. Last week was obviously just talking about like, man, what is God's sexual standard for us? Talking about sexual immorality. And this week we're really talking about sex and culture and kind of taking a 10,000 foot view of, man, like how did we get here as a culture? And I think for me, you know, being a creative kind of in my nature, just being aware of film and television and music, you know, obviously like the narrative around sex kind of being the pinnacle of our human experience. What are your thoughts on the narrative that's being told to this generation concerning sex?
Yeah, well, I think that God designed the world to be in a great balance. Like culture, we're so good together. We're made for each other. And when we have it in the way that the Bible's spoken about culture, it's so good and it's so fun. But I think when you remove God from that, which, you know, Satan loves to do, he loves to take something great that God has designed and just tweak it a little bit and put emphasis on other areas, or put one kind of area of what God's given us, lift it a little higher than another one. And I think one of those things has been our happiness. It's kind of a way where we've replaced pursuing something great about God. You know, He is the greatest fulfillment and the greatest fun. And when we transfer that and put something else in its place, then we have to start pursuing something else, because what are we going to do with that time? It's like a vacuum.
I love what you mentioned, the idea of like being in a vacuum, where, you know, Jeff talks about that in Romans 1 and just kind of this natural progression that takes place. You know, ultimately we were created for God, and there's a trajectory of life that comes when we pursue God. Likewise, when we decide, kind of like Romans 1's talk about, where, hey, when we decide no, like I don't want to worship you, I don't want to glorify you, the heart goes, well, I need to worship something, you know? And I think our culture has decided like that's going to be sex, you know? And so you see in Romans 1 kind of the natural depravity that begins to take place when God is taken off the throne and something else is put there. I
think it's not just sex, I think it's pleasure. I want what I want, and I want to be able to get what I want. And so it's replacing it with that. Like, that makes me feel good. I think it's almost like it's replaced, I think happiness has replaced it. And people feel as though, well, sex and what I want to do in that area, that brings me happiness, so therefore I should want that. And I think when you do that, it puts a burden on your own shoulders that is heavy. The thing I love about God is that He knows our past. You know, He formed us in our mother's womb. He actually decided who we were going to be before that. He put us in the exact place we're meant to be. And He then knows how to make that beautiful. And when we decide that we know best for ourselves, I think subconsciously that puts a lot of pressure on ourselves, because we don't know the end product.
I love that, you know, you talk about the idea, because again, I think about ultimately like, okay, yeah, like what is the narrative that culture is telling the generation? And yes, it's saying that like sex is the pinnacle of your existence, but ultimately it's like, hey, this will make you happy. And like, who doesn't want that? You know, it's a pretty compelling narrative. For you, what do you believe is the narrative that Jesus ultimately gives us to counter that narrative of like pursue in this culture, particularly sex? You know, what is the counter narrative that Jesus brings to the generation right now, you think?
I think He always comes from, well, I think looking at His motivation. His motivation is love for us and the best for us. I mean, He provided us a book to be able to figure that out. He has designed all of the interactions we have with people in the perfect way. And He has the answers for that and tells us how to live it. And I think we've focused on one area more than another, whether it be sex or even in marriage. You know, often we'll elevate that as though that's what we're aiming for. And He doesn't say that at all. He is God, and we're made in His image. There's so many aspects to Him. And He knows what we need. He knows what kind of interactions we need to have with each other, what kind of community we need to have that makes us feel fulfilled, what kind of interests we need to chase. And so He's provided all these avenues. And I think one of the lies that we can often find in church is that we feel like we have to have that relationship of marriage when we can have intimacy with so many other people. That's just one aspect. It's great, but then there's actually, if you are hanging out with your friends, you can have a different kind of intimacy with them. If you're hanging out with your cousins, that's a different intimacy. If you're hanging out with younger people, that's a different intimacy. And I think it's elevating those to come up to be the same. Like, we can really enjoy that. And in fact, if you aren't married, you can actually do more things in other ways that you can't do when you have the responsibilities of marriage. You know, I've thought about that. Yeah, love being with Steve, but there are a couple of times where I'm like, I want to do this. Let's go out and I'd love to do something for God in this way. And then I realize, wait, I can't really do that because I'm caring for a bunch of people in this way. Whereas instead, if you have all of the other kinds, you can be fulfilled in those areas as well. And I think, you know, often when you enter churches, you're told, don't do this, don't do this. The heart and the motivation behind it was so that you would know God. You'd press into Jesus. You wouldn't have these distractions.
Yes.
But when you focus on that, you start to tick boxes and achieve, like, especially if you're an achiever, you'll aim for that, rather than go, wait, no, again, it's the motivation. Am I pursuing Jesus because he has a heart for me? Do I have a heart for him? And then on the flip side, so that's some churches where there's all the rules. On the other side, you've got all of the, you know, do whatever you want because God loves you and he wants you to be happy. But then that's also not giving them the boundaries. It's not giving us the boundaries that we need. I think there's definitely a different way in the middle, which is his heart for us, where he's saying, hey, let's just do this the best way. I've designed this. I know how it works. Let's do it together. It's going to be great. It won't cause as much destruction for you. And along with that, when you have these moments of difficulty, you can press into him. And he's there just waiting to be like, cool, let's do this together. Yeah,
I love kind of just what you're saying. I feel like ultimately, whether it's culture, whether it's Christianity, both are claiming, and obviously we like to think that we kind of have, you know, the win in that sense, but like both are claiming to say this is where life comes from. And so Jeff kind of illustrates through Romans 1 of just like the natural progression of like, hey, when you put sex on the throne, the depravity that takes place, you know, when it's like, if I'm saying this is life, well, there's a natural progression that comes with that, kind of like climbing a ladder, you know? So it's like, hey, like if I know this is where I'm going, the steps that you are going to take are going to take you in a trajectory, you know? Same thing when God's on the throne. There's a natural trajectory, you know, and God's like, hey, when I'm seated rightfully here, as I was intended to be, there's a natural progression and a natural fulfillment that comes from walking that path. And it makes me think of what you were talking about earlier, just the anxiety that can come when I'm in control of fulfilling myself. We've limited our identity to what the culture says. You know, it's like, oh, if I'm not doing X or Y. I mean, I was even having conversations with my girls in my small group last week where it's like, man, they're surrounded by friends, you know, at their schools where it's like, what? Like, you're not doing this or that. You haven't done this or that. You know, there's this pressure of like, oh, you're missing out, or like you're less than because you haven't had these experiences, you know? And so I'm like, dang, that just like breaks my heart that like at such a young age, kids are being told this is what it means to be human. And if you're not fulfilling that, then like, you're like, who are you? Like you're no one if you're not having sex, like you're no one if you haven't, you know? And I think, you know, when you don't have the hope of who God is and how he created us, it can create a level of anxiety. It can create a level of depression, low self-worth, comparison. What would you say to someone even who might be struggling with that, where it's like, man, like I really feel like I'm missing out because like culture is saying this, the TV shows I watch, the movies I watch, the music I listen to. What would you say to somebody who is just like really struggling with like, man, I'm just really missing out?
Oh yeah. Well, this is why Jesus died, right? Because he cares so much for us. I'd say that there's hope with him. You know, I think we often don't look at the other side of it. Like if we did get all of what we wanted, well, where would that leave us? And you can look at other examples in culture where people have got everything they've wanted and they're not happy anyway. You know, the pursuit of that, as you say, has a ladder that it has a trajectory and you'll end up in a certain position. You know, God says, you can do that, go for it. But you'll end up on a trajectory of destruction. It might not be for you even, it might be for someone else. But whatever the case is that what you want? Or would you Jesus is here so that we can push into him, so that we can, on the flip side, go on a different ladder that takes us to a place where there is freedom from being, now I see that these things bind us. There's hope that he can help us through. He already knew who we were before we were born. We have a hope now. We know what we can do now. We have a purpose, and he knows the future and is good. Are we going to rest in that, or are we going to rest in what culture tells us today?
What would you say on the flip side of that, where it's like, man, maybe there's somebody who's, they're struggling. It's like, man, like I'm a kid, like I climbed that ladder.
Yeah.
Like I got to the top, and I was like, dang, that was not what I thought it would be. Whether it's their identity, whether it's sexual immorality, whatever it is,
or something that's happened to them.
Exactly, or abuse, trauma. What would you say the hope is to somebody who is experiencing such darkness or such shame because of those things?
I think the weightiness of that subconsciously holds us back from realizing his presence and realizing that he's not there trying to stand there and just judge on us and give us more shame. God has the perfect love. And I've had, even in moments where I've been talking to someone who I love so much and they've not reacted how I want, I'm really angry or really upset, I've come to the realization in that moment, when I turn to God, I can realize, wait, that person is human. I make mistakes, they make mistakes. But God, he has been human. He understands all of these things that have happened. He's gone through all temptations and other things. But he's just standing there ready to save us from that and say, hey, you don't need to be anything else. Who you are is awesome. I love you. I made you like this. That doesn't define you. That's just something that's happened to you. All we want is community. God made us for community. First and foremost with him. We try and replace it with other people, whereas other people, I think, are meant to be there as a demonstration of how great God is. But they're imperfect. He's perfect. So when I come to him, he says, you're with me now, and I'm never going to let you go. I've always got your back. Jesus is always available, and he always has hope. And he always gives us love, and he always gives us a way out where we're at. We don't have to be any different than what we are right now.
Yeah, that's what I feel like I've even realized in my own journey, as you get older, you're just more aware of your sin. Yeah. My reflection cannot be the realest thing, There needs to be a great, great love to combat such a great, great brokenness.
Yeah.
And so I love that, Jesus can handle that, Christy, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. I could talk with you forever. I'll keep talking for another hour, maybe. Again, guys, we love you guys, and there isn't a conversation that we don't want to tackle with you guys, And so again, maybe it's been a little uncomfortable for you the past few weeks, maybe having some of these conversations, but I pray that honestly, freedom can come from these conversations, truth can come from these conversations. And that again, it could be a safe place for you guys to just tackle real life issues, no matter what those are. And so again, man, I just pray that you would just leave these conversations just filled with hope with who God is and who God made you to be. And that, man, there are going to be things that the world's going to tell us about this is what it means to be human. And that, man, we don't have to find our identity or our worth in those things. And so again, we love you guys, and we pray that you guys just enjoy your groups today.